on lives and livelihoods. There is significant value in terms of the tourism industry, in terms of fisheries, in terms of maritime transportation. And in order to take action on pollution, I think it's important for us to recognize that there is a value to what pollutants are impacting on. But to start off from, what are we looking at? Pollution is just one of the many stressors and that impact our coastal and marine environment. We have problems of overfishing. You're going to hear a little bit about the degradation of habitats. We have concerns of climate change, and that's impacting on tourism, on fisheries, on livelihoods, on human health. And many of us are also talking now about the blue economy. What does that mean? And the fact that if we continue to pollute, we are not going to have any opportunities for a blue economy. The region has had some achievements, and I thought it would be useful, and this is the only time I'm going to talk about institutions. We've been talking about marine pollution in this region for a while. In 1994, there was a report done on the major sources of pollutants. In 1999, we had a regional instrument that was adopted, the Land-Based Sources of Marine Pollution Protocol. Interestingly, Trinidad and Tobago was the first English-speaking country to ratify that protocol, which entered into force in 2010. And really, it's a regional agreement that is supposed to facilitate action on marine pollution by all countries in the Caribbean. More recently, in 2019, we had this report by the World Bank about Not a Minute to Waste that really started to bring home that pollution is a big problem that we need to tackle in the Caribbean because of the impacts on the Caribbean Sea. And then our office also did a State of Marine Pollution report, and I'm going to give you a few highlights on what that report found. Pollution 101, two major sources, point sources, non-point sources, where we have discharge from sewage, from effluent, and where we also have discharge from sedimentation. And therefore, a number of different pollutants can enter the marine environment in this way. I put this here just for us to reflect a little bit. Percentage of marine pollution that comes from land-based sources and activities. And I would be happy if people can write in the chat what they think it is. Is it 5 to 35%? Is it 35 to 70%? 70 to 90%, or 90 to 100%? And I'm just gonna pause, just let persons think a little bit. Don't worry, there are no prizes and no failures, but what do you think it is? And we're gonna come back to that a little later in the presentation. But important to highlight that pollution comes from multiple sources: gray water, sewage, garbage, sedimentation, mining, and impacting on a number of coastal and marine ecosystems, causing algal blooms, fish kills, coral bleaching, seagrass decline. And for us who are more into conservation, that alone is enough to make us be concerned. But generally, when we talk to policymakers, politicians, we also have to show how is it affecting lives and livelihoods? How is it affecting fisheries, health, and tourism? And that's where perhaps we need to make a stronger connection. More importantly, as I mentioned, pollution is also affecting our economic opportunities moving forward. The heavy dependence of our islands and our countries on tourism, the opportunities that are available for aquaculture, for fishing, and for blue economy are all going to be threatened if we don't address marine pollution in an integrated way. I made reference to this report, this State of Marine Pollution report. And we had several collaborators, including the Institute of Marine Affairs, who helped pull together some of this data. In summary, it's showing that the state of the Caribbean seas we're not in good shape. We have high levels of contamination by sewage. We have hotspots identified in many countries throughout the region, most of them associated with river mouths and outfalls. Discharge of untreated sewage and wastewater continues to be a major problem, contributing significant sedimentation to the environment. And we also found that pollution tends to be higher in the wet season. And that's not so unusual when you think of heavy rainfall and you think of the amount of pollutants potentially that can be carried down through rivers, through drains, through gullies. I had to touch a little bit on plastic waste. That is probably the most topical pollutant that is being talked about now. 1.3 million tons of plastics discharged in Caribbean waters in 2015. Significant, and many of you might have heard about the efforts by UNEP and the decision to develop a new global agreement on plastics. We hope that that will cause some action to take place. But then we also have problems of mercury associated with gold mining, associated with industrial activities. And a recent study by the Basel Caribbean Center in Trinidad found high levels of mercury in many of the fish that are consumed by us as Caribbean persons. I think many of us might have seen this headline, a very scary headline: Caribbean being the biggest plastic polluter per capita in the world. Some modeling estimates also show very high levels of floating microplastic and macroplastic, and the Caribbean Sea was second only to the Mediterranean. So it's a problem. It's a problem that we need to address. And the plastic is coming from sewage, from stormwater, from coastal tourism. Packaging is the major sector where we have a problem, but we also have personal care products that also produce microfibers and microbeads. The impacts are global, from impacts on marine mammals, impacts of solid waste on land in terms of flooding. I have a couple of pictures here from Jamaica, leading plastic and particularly improper dumping of garbage causing flooding due to blocked drains. So this is one of the really major issues that we have to address. But I thought it would be perhaps a little, for the sake of this discussion, to also touch upon maybe a slightly more invisible pollutant that many of us don't like talking about. Plastics are very visible, but this one isn't: sewage. Only 15% of sewage in the Caribbean is actually collected, and as much as 65 to 85% is entering the Caribbean Sea untreated or only partially treated. And this is a significant problem impacting both on human health and our coastal and marine ecosystems. What makes domestic wastewater and sewage so complex is that it's a combination of a number of different pollutants that can impact on the marine environment: suspended solids, sediments, heavy metals, microplastics, nutrients. Even fresh water can cause damage to our systems. And then you have things like endocrine disruptors, some of those new and emerging pollutants, hormones, that can also impact on our livelihoods and on our coastal and marine ecosystems. So I wanted to touch upon this just very briefly because, again, this is a relatively new area that persons may not necessarily think of. When you consider the amount of expired drugs and hormones and pharmaceuticals that may be dumped down the drain, these potentially can have significant impacts on our coastal and marine biodiversity. We've heard reports of changes in sex of certain marine organisms as a result of these entering the environment. And the reality is our treatment systems at the moment do not remove these substances. So it's really about controlling them at source. All is not lost. And I did want to end with a little bit of a positive note. We need to change the narrative about marine pollution. It's very much seen as a out of sight, out of mind issue. It's very much seen as a problem that we need to solve. But we need to start seeing, is it an opportunity? Circular economy, using nature-based solutions, using reuse opportunities. How can we actually control, prevent, and reduce pollution in the first place? So it's all about changing that narrative so that when we invest in pollution reduction and control, we're actually also investing in probably new economic opportunities. So this is a slide that I'm not going to go through in detail, but I just wanted to highlight that the responses to pollution need to take place across many different areas. We need improved policy, legislation, enforcement. We hear that all the time. We also need more appropriate technology for us as Caribbean people. Sometimes we have technology that's imported from outside that we can't maintain, can't use, can't sustain. We have some great examples of community approaches to best management practices for pollution reduction, but we're not sharing them. We're not aware of who is doing what. So we need to really make a strong effort in terms of education and awareness. And again, I congratulate the entire team for this sort of event, because it starts to sensitize persons on really what's possible. We need to look at industry. We need to make sure that some of the industry practices are changed. And we need to engage the private sector. We've seen supermarkets with single-use plastic bans, but we also have to think about it from a consumer standpoint. We can demand changes in terms of sustainable consumption and production. And I wanted to end this presentation by really now bringing it into the aspect as it relates to lives and new job opportunities. The picture on the top left is a greenhouse that was developed in Suriname. The others are from right here in Jamaica, a local company that's doing some repurposing of plastics into valuable products. So it's not just about recycling, it's about upscaling and creating new job opportunities. And that's for plastics. We can also do it for wastewater, in terms of water, in terms of energy, and in terms of nutrients. Wastewater is a revenue earner if we implement the appropriate measures to recover the valuable resources which wastewater contains. So that's the journey, that's the snapshot, a little bit through what's happening with pollution, the state of pollution in the marine environment, some of the challenges that we have, and maybe even importantly, what are some of the opportunities. So open to any questions, comments, feedback. Thank you so much.
Hi, Selena, I see you have your hands up, so you have a question, go ahead.
Hi, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
So my question is this, seeing as there's like a lot of information on pollution, particularly plastic pollution, within the region and globally, I suppose, do you think it's still like worthwhile to be doing projects on evaluating land pollution or marine pollution, or should, like, let's say this from an NGO's standpoint, should they find other marine issues to focus on, or just bring to light what is already out there? What's your take on that? That's all.
Thanks, Selena, and that's a very good question. And I think for someone like me now, who's the gray hair show that I've been doing this for a while, I think sometimes it is a little frustrating when the focus becomes continually on studies and assessments and monitoring, when in many cases we have a reasonably good idea of the extent of the problem and the need for us to take action. Personally, I would like us to see really taking a lot more action on the ground, implementing practical solutions, both by civil society, but also by governments and private sector. I think we also have to consider a well-established approach as it relates to pollution, and that's the precautionary principle. We will always need more data. I'm a scientist myself, and I know there's this tendency we need to have more information, and we do. In some cases, we do have data gaps. In some cases, we don't understand, for example, where all the plastics are coming from. We need to understand, for example, waste characterization. This is something that has to be an ongoing process, both in terms of environmental education, but also in terms of ensuring that whatever actions that we take are going to be addressing the root cause of the problem. But we can't wait. We can't wait until we have all the data. To me, the two almost need to go hand in hand. And then in terms of what data and what studies that we do, I think it has to be very focused on what is it we are trying to find out. Is it that there's a new and emerging issue that we want to address and we don't understand, okay, where is it coming from? Who is it impacting? How can we address it? And I think that's how we have to consider using that those bits of information. And then we have to engage our research community, I think, a lot more. We have a couple of researchers, I think, who are going to present. Can we establish stronger partnerships with universities and research institutes so that some of that data which they have can actually be made available to decision makers and to NGOs when they want to implement more practical projects? Over.
Nice. So any more questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask where I could find some more of the information that you spoke about today.
It's a very good question, and I hear mea culpa. It's something that I think as a region we need to do better at. There's a lot of information out there, even our own information dissemination as UNEP. There are lots of links to reports. What I can do after this session is to perhaps share a list of links with some of the information and some of the reports that are available. Most recently, what we are trying to do, and I think what a number of colleagues are doing, is coming up with much shorter briefs targeted for students, for the general public, for decision makers, which takes a lot of this scientific information and breaks it down. But yeah, I will share some links afterwards, but I would say that we do have a lot to do in terms of making the public more aware of the findings of many of these studies on marine pollution. Honestly, a lot of people are not aware. Over.
Thank you very much. So when you send me that list, guys, I would share it with you all, so no worries. And Chris, I know some people were asking about the presentation, if they could get the slides as well. So if you'll be willing to share, they would greatly appreciate it.
Yes.
Okay, I'm seeing some thank yous, and yeah,
absolutely.
They would appreciate that.
No,
okay.
no problem. No problem at all.
No, all right. Any other questions before we jump to our next speaker?
Hi, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Great presentation, summed it up in a little bit of time, which is great. So I was just wondering, in your opinion, like how effective do you think like recycling is? I feel like in Trinidad, we don't really have good infrastructure or infrastructure at all to carry out recycling. Like where are all these, for instance, these bottles going? And then there are initiatives, a lot of initiatives to help to try and reuse, recycle our plastic. So like they would mix it into concrete and use it to pave roads. But then I think of the wear and tear, like after a while, like cars driving over these roads mixed with plastics, like that kind of contributes, I think, to like microplastics. So it's like how effective is it really? Like, where do we stand with recycling plastics? Yeah, and also what, in your opinion, is the best way to kind of break away from silos in the Caribbean? Because we have a big issue with that, especially with integrated management for marine pollution.
Well, how much longer do we have? I'll try and give a short answer, but I'm happy to maybe carry on this discussion afterwards. On the integration end, it really applies even not just to marine pollution, but to fisheries and marine biodiversity and tourism and planning. And a lot of it is very much in silos. And I think there's a feeling, for example, that marine pollution is the responsibility of only the regulatory agency, an environmental authority or the waste management authority. And I think not enough recognition that if we don't take care of environment, we are actually affecting our economic opportunity. So I think at national level, there really needs to be more systems that allow dialogue across sectors, mechanisms that allow stakeholder involvement, whether it be from civil society, from environmental groups and so on, so that at least when we come up with these development plans, that they are not as narrowly focused as many of them are now. So they take on board the full cost of the environmental damage that might occur from certain types of investment. Very quickly on the topic of recycling, yeah, there's no doubt that recycling is part of the answer. but I am a little afraid myself that it's not the salvo, it's not the solution to all of our problems. I fully agree with you. We have to look at the value added. We have to look at the capacity of the region to recycle. We have to look at what are we aiming to recycle. So I think we need to, first of all, ban a number of things that maybe don't have a value added. Then we need to look at what would make sense in an economic way for us to target for recycling. But recycling is not going to solve the entire waste management problem. It really is something that is going to involve both the generation of plastics in terms of production, and then how we deal with it in terms of ensuring that we minimize the amounts of plastics that we dispose and have to recycle. Percentages in developed countries are also low. I think the US is less than 10% that's actually recycled. So it is something that we have to be careful of. It's not the solution, the only solution or the overall solution to the problem. Thanks.
All right, so I feel like some of you guys might have some more questions, but don't worry, we will jump to our next speaker now, Dr. Anjani, and then when she finishes, we have a third speaker, Tadzio, that's running away from one of his sessions to come and speak to us, and then we will open back up the floor for questions and a discussion. So no worries, if you have any more questions, there's time after to ask. So Dr. Anjani, feel free to take the floor. And thank you so much, Christopher, for your presentation. It was very much well summed up and informative at the same time. So yeah, Anjani, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Khadija. Can you all see? I'm assuming you all can see it, my presentation. All right, great. Yeah, so quick thank you for having me here today. And I hope my presentation can also start some interesting conversations at the end of it and even at the end of the session. What I'm going to be talking to you about is on coral reef degradation and restoration in the Caribbean, but I'm going to be talking to you about it from the perspective of the work being done in Trinidad and Tobago. So just to give you a bit of very brief background, I work at the Institute of Marine Affairs, and we are essentially like we were created by the government during the 1970s as a statutory body for marine research, particularly because in Trinidad and Tobago, there was a lot of industry and happening on the waters of Trinidad and Tobago. And so there was a need to have a body of experts to monitor and give guidance in terms of decision-making with respect to the health of the marine environments, knowing that we depend on our marine ecosystems a lot in Trinidad and Tobago, as well as throughout the Caribbean. Our organization has 5 focal research areas where I come in. I work under the biodiversity and ecology stream, but we look also at the physical-chemical parameters in the marine ecosystems. We also look at fisheries and aquaculture strategies for these industries, as well as oceanography, coastal processes, so things like coastal erosion, how our coastlines change in different seasons, as well as in long terms when it comes to climate change. And of course, we package all this information to advise for policy and governance and decision making by the government, but also by organizations that work in the marine environment in Trinidad and Tobago. My background is in marine spatial ecology. I did my PhD at the University of Queensland in Australia, and I was fortunate to be able to work not Caribbean, but in coral reef ecosystems in Australia, as well as in different places throughout the Caribbean. And now I've been at the IMA for the last 3 years, working at as a research officer in coral reef ecology. My day-to-day activities are, as Chris mentioned, there's a lot of monitoring and advisory that's taking place, and we do quite a lot of long-term monitoring of the marine environments to sort of give an idea of like the long-term trajectory of reef health. But we also review legislature, we also guide policy drafting, and of course a big component is outreach and education. Despite the fact that we live on a twin island, we're a twin island nation, there is not a lot of education on the marine environment, and so it is a big component of the work we do. And when we do have time, we try to apply some research, and this research usually focuses on ways to improve management strategies, ways to improve conservation, so strategies like in marine spatial planning, or strategies in, for example, active restoration and whatnot. So all our research tends to apply to the conservation of the ecosystem as well, and how it relates to the users of that ecosystem. So just a very brief background in terms of, the benefits of coral reefs. In terms of biodiversity, coral reefs are known hotspots for biodiversity. The statistic is that coral reefs lie in less than 1% of the ocean, but provide over 25% of all marine biodiversity. So there's an incredible amount of marine life that depends on coral reefs. And we depend on a lot of that marine life for our food, our livelihoods. As you know, Caribbean islands are a major tourism destination, and a lot of our economies are based on these services that the coral reefs provide. Just the natural beauty of it and the functional, the ecological functions of these reefs, we benefit tremendously from it. Even recreation and diving, if surfing, any kind of on the water activities that we do in our day-to-day lives, even if it's just beach going, we have the coral reefs to thank for. And then that ties into things like coastal protection. Most of the sheltered bays and beaches that we like to spend our time on the weekends are probably protected and sheltered because of the coral reefs that grow just offshore of these coastlines. I know in Tobago, the whole southwest part of Tobago are low-lying areas, and if we didn't have that coral reef, if you didn't have the buccal reef that fringed along the Pigeon Point area, we would not have, Pigeon Point would not be the most popular, beach on the island. And I'm sure for the other Caribbean islands, you can relate to having your favorite beach, and you can have the coral reefs, and that they're coral reefs offshore that are doing the job of coastal protection. Despite the fact that we benefit quite a lot from coral reefs, we do have a pretty terrible relationship in terms of how we treat coral reefs, and that is just the history of how Caribbean islands have developed, how communities have mostly developed along the coastline where there's a lot of coastal development, or even along river mouths and where traditionally we would have harbors and whatnot for our industries and businesses and whatnot. And so as Chris spoke about a lot, there's a lot of pollution that runs off from land, and knowing that the coral reefs are the first sort of marine ecosystem it hits, coral reefs are the first to sort of be impacted by land-based sources of pollution. But also we have things like marine pollution, plastic pollution, all those things affect our reefs significantly. The other factors that affect our coral reefs are unregulated fishing. The Caribbean in general has a very, very long history of unregulated fishing. It goes back for centuries. And now what we have is a scenario where you are overfishing and then you're fishing down the food chain. So in a lot of work that I've done on in other countries and whatnot, in the Caribbean, you would find, for example, very few sharks, which are top predators, but are very important for the health of coral reefs. So sharks are the first to sort of been taken out of that food web that is important for coral reefs. And then what has happened is that we've subsequently fished down that food chain, and now we're sort of losing our herbivores, which are important grazers on algae, which are competitors to the corals. And we essentially need these players to sort of build coral reef resilience. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. As we have more industry and we depend and we use the ocean as sort of a medium for industry and business and commerce, things like diseases have been a big issue on coral reefs, as well as invasive species such as the lionfish and other non-native species that do spread throughout the Caribbean. And of course, the major impact that we're all aware of is climate change. Heat stress and extreme events are supposed to be are expected to become more severe, more frequent in the future. And that would lead to coral bleaching, to more coral bleaching, to more severe hurricanes, as well as to more disease outbreaks in the future. So I'll just briefly go through a very brief history of the sort of the unfortunate events that have happened to Caribbean reefs, including the reefs in Tobago. So during the 90s, even during the 1970s and 80s, scientists who have done the research have looked back and have realized that even warming back then was a likely trigger to like disease outbreaks that we've seen back in the 1970s. For example, the white band disease spread like wildfire throughout the Caribbean and wiped out our two major branching coral species known as Acropora palmata and Acropora cervicornis. We lost about 97% of our branching corals throughout the Caribbean within that decade. In the 1980s, another disease wiped out the sea urchin. It's a major grazer of reef algae, and this specific species was also wiped out and decimated populations throughout the Caribbean. Moving from the 1990s on to the 2000s and whatnot, this is when we started seeing our bleaching events happening. So 97, 98 was the first global bleaching event. And what you do notice is that these bleaching events are becoming more frequent as you go into the 2000s, and it's expected to become even more severe moving on into the future. And so, for example, the third global coral bleaching event was not just a 1 year of summers around the world that affected coral reefs around the world in the tropical areas. It was a back-to-back bleaching event where 2 summers in a row, coral reefs were being, the waters were too hot, and then corals were bleaching in 2 summers in a row in places like in the Northern Caribbean and as well as in the Indo-Pacific region. And then, of course, we have the hurricanes that, if you know, that would just directly destroy coral reefs, not to mention the lives and, you know, of the people of us that live on these Caribbean islands. Hurricanes are a trauma, and it's a serious disturbance event for everyone that lives in the Caribbean. So in terms of Tobago, so the IMA, we've been observing coral reefs since the 1970s and 80s, but we've been monitoring annually since 2010 the health of the reefs throughout Tobago. And we started this in 2010, just before the 2010 coral bleaching event. And so before then, the average coral cover for Tobago was around 30%. And that is sort of a moderately healthy reef. If you want to, as comparison, studies done back in the 50s and 60s, coral cover would be up to about 60% in certain scenarios, even higher, depending on where your reef is. So that is a pristine reef. So we basically have, in 2010, reefs that were already been significantly affected and damaged. After the 2010 bleaching event, coral cover drops by half to about 15%. So if you follow that green line on the graph, you notice that green line hovers around 15%. There might be a little bit of recovery, but not much for the next 10 years. And that sort of signals to me that there's something that we probably didn't have much more disturbances that significantly resulted in coral mortality. So we didn't see any more decline, but at the same time, in 10 years, we've seen zero recovery to original states. And that is usually a result of the players, the ecological players, not being present on the reef to allow for that recovery. And so what we do is we try to monitor for reef resilience, and reef resilience refers to that ability of the reef to recover or resist disturbance. So recover from disturbances or resist disturbances. And when you think about climate change, these disturbances are going to become more frequent and more severe in the future. So we do sort of survey the coral reefs across Tobago, and we look at specific factors like hard coral cover, what is the population diversity, what is the original stock that can produce more or can grow and recover. And specific things that we do look at and which are actually affecting Tobago's reefs in particular. I can't speak for the other areas in the Caribbean, but I do know that we have similar afflictions, is that coral disease, for example, is a big factor on Tobago's reefs. A lot of our hard corals are affected by disease like yellow band, black band, white spot, and growth anomalies. And a lot of that gives us clues in terms of like the water quality. And so we know that even though that warming and bacterial blooms and stuff can result into disease, often the poor water quality often drives the spread of coral disease as well. The other thing is coral juveniles. In Tobago, the population of juveniles will replace the adult population or help recover the populations over time. And what we've also noticed is that there's not a lot of coral juveniles or coral recruits on our reefs. And I will go into a bit more about why, but it is a concern when we can't get new coral populations forming on our reefs. And then the last thing is the herbivore biomass. As I mentioned before, parrotfish and other grazers on the reef, they scrape up all the algae that competes with corals, preventing corals to grow. And so when you look at our herbivore biomass, we realize that it's significantly lower than it should. And that means that there's a lot more action and activities when it comes to managing these specific players on coral reefs. And so it's very similar to what Chris was talking about. Urgent action is needed. You know, we have a lot of history and knowledge of what's taking place on our reefs, and what's happening in Tobago is not unique at all by any means. It is something that's happening throughout the Caribbean. And so since joining the IMA 3 years ago, and because this decade is a decade for ocean science and sustainable development, there is incredible push for more action, more active management, for an active role in science, and in building strategies to improve reef health. And when you think about the climate projections, where coral reefs are likely to be, well, there's likely that 70 to 90% of all corals are going to be lost by 2050 during global warming. There's a lot of urgency there. In the next 20 to 30 years, a lot of infrastructure and groundwork has to be put into place to be able to protect the existing stocks, as well as to build that resilience into the long term for future. And so the three things that I tend to focus on for building ocean resilience is targeted stress reduction. So that means, you know, upping our management, talking to government a lot more to have focused efforts on stress reduction strategies as it relates to coral reefs. Adaptive management, so things like marine spatial planning, having a dynamic system in which we allow corals, or we give different protections for areas that require recovery or special attention. And then you have things like active restoration, which is something that I'm trying to develop in Tobago in particular over the next 3 to 5 years. So just I'm now going to go into a bit more about, you know, the active restoration strategies that I'm going to try and implement in Tobago. And to do that, I'll just give a bit of an overview of why Tobago's recruitment and seed stocking replenishments are quite low compared to maybe other places in the Caribbean. So this map is a representation of the different types of physical environments in the Caribbean Sea. I know a lot of people think that the Caribbean Sea is quite homogeneous, but you do the factors like temperature, salinity, water clarity varies quite a lot and gives very unique environments throughout the Caribbean. And when it comes to Trinidad and Tobago, because we're on the continental shelf, our marine environments and our ocean conditions are extremely unique. We have lower salinities because of Orinoco. We have higher sedimentations. We have poorer water clarity. And as a result, the corals that do strive in our waters tend to be more stress tolerant, tend to be more hardier, slow growing corals. And we don't have all the species as you would get, for example, in Cuba and Jamaica and the northern parts of the Caribbean, where that area is seen more as like the center of biodiversity when it comes to coral reefs in the Caribbean. And this is just another graphic to show how the limited connectivity when it comes to coral larval distribution or redistribution for seed stock and supply to neighboring reefs. You can see where the highest reef connections are, again, in the Greater Antilles, at Florida, Bahamas, as well as along the Mesoamerican coastline and Central American areas. In contrast, Trinidad and Tobago is very much on the outskirts of connectivity. We have very poor connections with even the islands upstream, which is like Grenada and St. Lucia and whatnot. We have very limited connectivity. And that is one of the reasons why that, you know, the seeding of our populations it's quite poor. And actually it is likely that our reefs self-seed to create new populations. And so if that that is not working, then we need to work on sort of fixing the players or fixing the functions on the reef that support natural coral reef reproduction. So when it comes to active restoration of coral reefs, there are many strategies, and the field of research for active restoration has gone through over 10 years of intense research, especially in the Caribbean. And now a lot of these strategies are actually being adopted in places where they never thought they'd have to do restoration. So places like in Australia and in the Pacific. And that's because in the Caribbean, we've had a lot of disturbances on our coral species, and also because we have a smaller number of coral species to work with. And so restoration is becoming more of a mainstream strategy that you tack on with management and whatnot. So the type of intervention that you do depends on your objective, but it also depends on the corals and it depends on the environment. So for example, if your coral reefs have suffered significant damage from hurricanes and the reefs have been turned to rubble, you would add artificial reefs to stabilize those damaged reefs. And then you would encourage growth of corals on these artificial structures. But that's not suitable in every scenario. In places where you have poor water quality and you've got algal overgrowth and blooming, that artificial structure is not going to help. You need to fix the water quality. And so any strategy that you choose really depends on your objective and on the environment you're working in. So last year, the IMA worked with Secretariat International. They are the gurus when it comes to anything restoration on coral reefs. They work internationally, and they work with groups around the Caribbean and in other places to develop your strategy that's suitable for your environment. And so for Tobago, we're going to be focusing on larval-based coral restoration strategies. And that is suitable because we have a lot of slow-growing, very old, large boulder brain corals. And so if you focus on maximizing their reproductive rate, hopefully we can sort of not just improve the populations, but also expand on the genetic diversity, which we do need in order to sort of resist or build resilience against climate change. So hopefully we have coral babies that are more heat tolerant or you know, more stress tolerant than their adults. And so that's sort of the idea that we're trying to apply in Tobago. So this is just, I'll just play the video, but this is sort of the techniques that we learned. We did the workshop in Curacao where we collected the sperm and eggs of corals. For every species, different species will spawn at different times through the year. And so we'll go diving, collecting the sperm and eggs. We will maximize fertilization in the lab. And then when we know that there's larvae forming, we would seed the reef directly, or you would seed special tiles that would accept the coral larvae and allow it to grow. And then you can actually grow these coral babies in a safe space before putting it out on the reef, or you can actually just put it out on the reef. And so Secor works in terms of maximizing the success of this strategy. And so even if you have issues in management, or if you have issues in water quality and stuff, the work that they do, like the tiles, the materials used in the tiles, that might resist algae or encourage certain algae to grow, they work on the hardcore science for this applied type of work. And that's what we're going to be working with them to do in the next sort of 3 to 5 years. And so essentially, I want to put restoration framework into Trinidad and Tobago. So on top of management, we have this plan for restoration because it is going to be a part of our future when it comes to climate change. There is no doubt that we're going to be having coral bleaching events, and that's why we need to have or know the type of measures that we need to take to help the corals recover. And so this is essentially the plan for the next 5 years, is sort of building our capacity, assessing site feasibility to know where and when to work first, and then to start pilot implementations. And then when we know the methods work for Tobago, then scale up the efforts. Anyway, that's pretty much it. Sorry for taking up a lot of your time.
No worries, that was good. So guys, I want you to make note of any questions that you have, write it down so that you don't forget, so that when we come back after the next presenter, Dr. Anjani will be here to answer. So moving on, we have Tadzio Bervouts, Director of the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance and co-founder of the Caribbean Shark Coalition, joining us today, right now, to speak. And I believe yesterday was his birthday, so join me in wishing him a very, very happy birthday and stuff. I saw it.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So you can send happy birthday. Yes, happy birthday messages are coming in the chat. So yes, thank you so much for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here. First, I need to apologize. I'm actually giving this talk from a hotel lobby. We are having our annual general meeting, so we are kind of bound by some of the ambient noise, but I'll try my best. I hope I found a quiet spot, but yeah, I'll try my best. And if there's any disruptions, please excuse me. So I will try to share my screen if that works. I am screen sharing. PowerPoint. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Let me go to the beginning. All right, so again, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Tadzio. I'm the director of the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance, which is a network organization that provides support to the protected area management organizations on the 6 islands of the Dutch Caribbean. I am originally from St. Martin. I currently live on Bonaire, but for our meeting over the next 2 weeks, I'll be based in the Northeastern Caribbean, and I'm currently coming to you from St. Martin. Our job as DCNA, like I mentioned, is to provide financial and capacity and project management support to those protected area management organizations on Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, in the so-called ABC Islands in the Southern Caribbean, but also to Saba, St. Eustatius, and St. Martin, which are located in the Northeastern Caribbean. So just let me try and see if I can move that. Perfect. I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, so I mentioned DCNA, the organization which I represent. Our motto is safeguarding nature in the Dutch Caribbean, and the way that we safeguard nature, like I mentioned, is through the support of protected area management organizations. Like I also mentioned, one of the challenges, of course, other than meeting the needs of 6 very different organizations based on 6 very different islands, is that we're also separated from one end of the Caribbean to the other end of the Caribbean. But that's why we have meetings such as the one that I'm chairing for the next couple of weeks, so that we can align our best practices, come up with new strategies, etc., etc. And one of the strategies, one of the main parts that we have been working on is our shark conservation program, which I will get a little bit more into. So why shark conservation? We have noticed a steep decline in the shark populations on all 6 of our islands, so both in the Northeastern Caribbean and in the Southern Caribbean. And why is this worrisome? Because of the important ecological functions that sharks provide. These are the next 3 slides are slides in full transparency that I stole from my friend and colleague, Dr. Caleb Roberts. He does a much better job presenting them than I do, but I will try my best. So what are we trying to accomplish, or why shark conservation? So here you see in this slide, if an area or a country or a territory only has fisheries measures, so no wide-scale conservation of ecosystems or apex predators, you have a situation where you have extremely high pressure, and because of that, you have very little fish abundance and very little coral cover. And this I've seen this in places such as Jamaica, for example, where, they sell striped parrotfish commercially. And when you dive in the reefs, it's more algal dominated more than anything else. So if you have only fisheries measures, you sort of starting to see an increase of hard coral cover. You start to see an increase of larger fish species. You have an increase in biomass. You have an increase in reef predators. But if you have an increase in those fisheries measures, you start to see an increase in coral cover. You start to see an increase in acroporid corals like Acropora palmata, Acropora cervicornis. You start to see the apex predators starting to come around, such as smaller reef species, reef sharks, groupers, certain snappers. Your parrotfish population also increases. But if you have fisheries measures, large-scale MPAs, but also species-specific conservation measures on sort of the apex predators, you can see a much healthier reef ecosystem from the food chain, from the top of the food chain all the way down. I apologize. My hotel is located on the famous St. Martin runway, close to the same famous St. Martin runway. So from time to time, you hear airplanes take off and land. So with that in mind, like I mentioned before, we saw a significant decrease in the shark population, which kind of went hand in hand with a general decrease in the biodiversity on the coral reef ecosystems on all 6 islands of the Dutch Caribbean. We also manage an area called the Saba Bank. The Saba Bank, as the name suggests, is an atoll which is off the tiny island of Saba. It is a very important biological area with high biodiversity. It is also a protected area. It's the 3rd largest submerged atoll on the planet. But from time to time, we did find issues in terms of especially longliners that came to the Saba Bank. This is a Taiwanese boat that we intercepted during a joint patrol that we did with the Coast Guard. And we found, just by taking pictures from the Coast Guard helicopter that we were on, that the deck was covered in a significant amount of various species of shark. Of course, the problem is also on our islands itself. That is unfortunately a clip that is from our neighboring island of Anguilla here in St. Martin. And it's one of the reasons why we didn't only focus on our islands, but we also focused on including some of the islands that are neighboring to us. But like I mentioned, we saw a collapse in the shark population on all 6 of the islands of the Dutch Caribbean. Even on islands such as Bonaire, which are well known for their conservation and marine conservation strategies and frameworks and legislation, etc., etc. We were still encountering a significant drop in the shark population, and this mostly due to poaching, since the animals are technically protected as part of their legislation. This is also from Aruba. This individual thought it was cool and macho to pose with a reef shark that he shot with a spear gun. This is a tiger shark which was caught in Aruba. This is the same tiger shark from Aruba. This is a picture from Curacao, also a picture from Curacao. And it's important to note that our islands don't really have a culture of consuming shark meat. This is just plainly animals that were caught because people that caught them thought it was a manly or a strong thing to do. Most of the times the jaws are cut out for the curio trade or as trophies, and then the rest of the animal was discarded and wasn't even used as food or anything like that. This is a picture from St. Martin. In this case, the fins were removed and the head chopped off. Presumably the head is also chopped off for the use of the jaws, but although we weren't, because we just found this in the middle of the tourist capital of St. Martin on the boardwalk, without any context. Someone just called me to respond to it. We assumed that the fins were used for to sell on the local market, especially to the Asian market, unfortunately. This is another picture of a hammerhead that was found randomly on the beach in Bonaire. But it's also a global problem. I mean, the shark fin trade accounts for almost the majority of why these animals are caught. Some estimates put it at 500 million sharks killed annually, some of the Pew Environment Trust research data that's out there. Unfortunately, sharks being apex predators and human beings using their ecosystem for recreation, etc., they are, inevitably negative human-shark interactions. In December 2020, there was a fatal interaction between a shark and a swimmer on St. Martin, on the French half of St. Martin at Orient Beach. Unfortunately, the individual that was swimming got bitten by a tiger shark, and she passed away due to her injuries. A few weeks later, a swimmer was bitten between St. Kitts and Nevis, and based on some of the DNA analysis which was conducted, it was established that it was the same animal. Unfortunately, that also resulted So unfortunately, that also resulted in a, I don't want to call it revenge, but I'm going to call it revenge in any way. We lost about 8 individual sharks that we knew personally on the basis of our research that we have been conducting on St. Martin as part of a revenge call. And we also saw this, similar things happening on other islands within the region. But our motto is always keep calm and love sharks. So instead of complaining too much about an issue, we found, we always looking for ways to address the situation. We're big believers in that data should drive decision making. So one of the things that we did was to ensure that we put together a solid research plan, that we were able to collect the data and that we were able to use that data to inform, to have informed policy briefs to our decision makers so that we can increase shark conservation, not only in the area that we work, but throughout the Caribbean region. So our first project that we actually did was launched in 2014. We applied as the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance to the Dutch National Postcode Lottery. So in fact, the 4 years of shark conservation that we did in the Dutch Caribbean before we relaunched our project in 2020 was funded by Dutch gambling money. I have no problem with that. But that project allowed us to work with fishermen, the scientific community, but also very importantly, local communities to put an end to the slaughter, the wide-scale slaughter of sharks within the Dutch Caribbean. And also to encourage our local islanders to benefit from the live population of sharks as a valuable tourism asset. Like I mentioned, one of the most important and critical components of that particular project was our education and outreach. We had, of course, the classic model of going to schools, talking with educators, going to classrooms, doing classroom visits. It was, despite us being in the field tagging sharks for days and weeks on end on expedition vessels, this by far was the most exhausting, but also the most rewarding part of that project, being able to interact with a whole bunch of rowdy, boisterous kids for 6 weeks without end. It, like I mentioned, it was exhausting, but it was also the most rewarding part of the project. As part of that project, we were also able to have some funding to train at-risk youth to become divers. I mean, you love what you're aware of, or you love what you interact with. So we really had it as a priority to also work with the government department on the islands that deals with at-risk youths, some of the orphanages, to also give them their diver certification and train them as essentially shark scientists and help us gathering the data in the field. We also had an ambassador This gentleman is a well-known comedian both in the Netherlands and in the Dutch Caribbean, with roots going back to, going back generations on the islands. And he immediately said that he would love to come and do a round of the islands. He did stand-up comedy tours, focused on shark conservation. Some of the jokes that he wrote were absolutely, crass. They were more suitable for the adults in the room than for the children, but it did cause a, it did enhance the awareness of the general public in shark conservation. It was one of the first times in my career that I sat down in strategic joke planning sessions. It was awesome to be a part of. One of the other priority groups that we worked with were fishermen. Often when we talk about especially marine conservation in the Caribbean, fishers are often vilified and made out to be the enemy, while it's actually the opposite. Not only are they an important stakeholder, but they're also, a group of the population that is, that has the closest connection with the resource that we're trying to protect. So getting them on board, involving them in our research programs, and also having them as ambassadors was a critical component of our project as well. So the way that we did is we organized fishermen exchanges. We had also some ambassadors or champions, fishermen which were well known within the communities of all 6 of the islands, who we trained initially in a trainer for trainer workshop in catch, tag, and release, so that they can also train their colleagues, have them as parabiologists. We involved them in our sighting network, so we were able to get data from their distribution and migration. And we had endless fishermen meetings, which caused some liver issues for me, because fishermen meetings always go hand in hand with the consumption of copious amounts of beer. But because of that, and because of that close interaction, we were able to make some real gains and involve fishers in our both in our research and as part of our outreach and communication strategy. This was actually the first fisher that we were able to get on board. This is a local fisherman from St. Martin. This is Stefan Tuti. And while he was out fishing, he actually caught the first recorded sharp-nosed shark on St. Martin, and placed actually also the first ever shark tag, even before any of us, quote unquote, scientists were able to do so. So that's why it's so important to also involve the fisher community, which is, in my opinion, one of the most overlooked stakeholder groups when you're talking about maritime and marine conservation. One of the other interesting studies that we did, which had a much wider implications than just shark conservation, we received some funding from the Smithsonian Institute in the US to do seafood analysis, to be able to determine if there was any mislabeling of seafood that is being sold, especially on the tourism market on some of the high tourism islands, Aruba, St. Martin, and Curacao specifically. This is me taking a sample of shark fin soup from an Asian restaurant here on St. Martin. We took those samples and we sent them over to the Smithsonian, together with a sample from Trinidad, if my recollection is adequate. So this also involved us for 2 weeks on end, going to various restaurants, of course, not only Asian restaurants, but also, fish restaurants here on the islands, usual tourist trap places that were selling snapper, etc., etc. And as a result of that, we found that actually a lot of the seafood on St. Martin is mislabeled. For example, you have areas that are restaurants that are selling, fish and chips, red snapper. Turned out that they were actually blue shark. Places that were also selling shark fin soup, for example, turned out that they were swordfish, and this also had much wider implications because some of these species are actually listed on the CITES under the CITES protocol, and we found that some of the seafood wholesalers were actually in breach of the CITES requirements here on the island. For us Caribbean people, it was also quite sad to see that a lot of salt fish being sold on the island was actually either swordfish or shark. So unfortunately, not all saltfish is sweet. We also did a diver study. So we involved the diver community to have a presence absence of the shark population while they were out on their dives. That was sort of our first step in determining on how we would scale up our shark conservation activities. We started with our diver study, as I mentioned. Well, actually, no, we started with our fisherman study, and then sort of simultaneously, a few months after that, we also started with our diver study. We developed a protocol that we would give to the dive operators so that they can record the species of shark and the number of those species that they observed during a particular dive. Also important for us during this stage was also to have the zero recordings, because that was also important information for us. How many species were not recorded was just as important for us as how many species were recorded. Another plane is taking off. I'll take a couple of seconds. And as a result of both the involvement of the fishermen and the diver surveys, we were able to establish that, okay, we have a robust enough population to be able to move to the next stage of our shark conservation program and to really increase the science that we are counting on the species. So the first thing that we did was to deploy Bervouts, so baited remote underwater video cameras, which is basically a frame that we welded together from aluminum and stainless steel, depending on which welder we had available to us. In that frame, we attach a video camera. There are various ones. We had stereo Bervouts, which also gave us size estimates. But we also had normal Bervouts, which were a lot less fancy than the stereo Bervouts. We just added a GoPro to it. We attached a broomstick to that, and then to that broomstick we attached a bait bag, and we basically recorded all of the animals that swam in front of that baited, in front of the baited camera. So that was a video that was made by two former interns of mine that did groundwork for that baited remote underwater video camera project that we did. Of course, the result of their assignment didn't only include a fancy video that I use exhaustively during my presentations, but it also resulted in a paper which allowed us to say, okay, we did the video studies, or we did the baited remote underwater video Bervouts studies. We established that we have a population that is robust enough, or that is has enough, there are enough sharks for us to upscale our conservation work. Also very interesting, one of the last clips in the video that you just saw involved a baby tiger shark, and we will get to that. I'll get to that a bit later. I'll give a little bit of context before the video so you know what you're looking at. I apologize for not doing that earlier. So the next step that we did after we were able to establish that, okay, we have enough sharks to scale up, is to do our acoustic telemetry. So for species that have a high site fidelity, so that stick around at a particular area for the majority of their life cycle, and in this case, primarily the nurse sharks and the Caribbean reef sharks, which have been actually last year listed as endangered within our region. We decided, okay, the next step of our research is to do acoustic telemetry. The way that we do that is we, using scuba gear, we placed an acoustic array surrounding the islands. We did this for all 6 of the islands. So those are acoustic receivers that we placed using scuba gear on the seafloor. And we then physically caught the animals, brought them on board and implanted an acoustic transmitter. Transmitters transmit and receivers receive. Yeah, so we implanted acoustic transmitters into the body cavity of the animal. It looks gnarly, but we did it very carefully, and we ensured that the animals were not harmed. So this is the acoustic telemetry study. Like I mentioned, we did this both for Caribbean reef sharks and nurse sharks. And on the right, you can see what the acoustic receivers look like. So once that stage was completed, and during the fishing, because essentially it is fishing for the specimens that we wanted to study, we also came across, and also based on the Bervouts study, and especially the juvenile tiger shark that you saw, we decided that there's something happening with some highly migratory species within our region. So we decided to then move towards the stage where we would actually consider doing satellite telemetry. Satellite telemetry means that we physically catch the animal and we place a satellite tag on the dorsal fin of the animal that we do the workup on. We set them free, and then we're able to track their migratory pattern throughout the Caribbean region. The way that we do this is using a drumline. Actually, it is adapted from the programs, especially in Australia and South Africa, where they catch quote unquote problem sharks, not to do research, but to actually kill them to reduce the population, especially after a major shark attack. So the way that we do that is we have an anchor on the sea bottom that we place not permanently. So we check the lines every hour and a half or so. That line is attached to an upline, which is attached to a buoy. Right below that buoy, there is a baited hook that we bait with mostly a very oily, bloody fish, and in this case, it's bonito tuna. All right, so what you just saw in that clip is one of the first workups of a large tiger shark that we did. We did that on the Sabre Bank. So a few things that happened during that clip. Of course, we take measurements. So we take total length, which as the name suggests is the total length of the animal. We also take precaudal length, which is the length right before the tail, the fork length, which is the length from the tip of the nose to where the tail splits. We took the girth, so how fat the animal is, and we also implanted pit tags, which is the same type of tag that you would implant in your household pet. And then we also did a visual tag on the outside. This particular clip is from an expedition that we did in 2016, where also the Discovery Channel was on board. So we were featured on Discovery Channel Shark Week for that particular trip. You know, it took 1 week expedition for 15 minutes, literally 15 minutes of fame. But at least Discovery Channel referred to me as Dr. Bervouts, so I'll take it. So that clip it's actually the first animal that we satellite tagged. As you can see, it's a very involved process. Sorry for all the grunting sounds. I'm always embarrassed when I show that clip. I must say that it looks gnarly, but actually there are very little to no nerve endings in the dorsal fin of these, especially these large sharks. So what you can see me doing there is placing the satellite tag, which we actually use to track the migratory pattern of the animals throughout the wider Caribbean. What happens when the shark, especially tiger sharks, from time to time, they break the surface. When they break the surface, the satellite tag or the satellite transmitter tag does a handshake with a satellite in outer space, and that satellite then in turn beams the data to we have a little bit of a noisy group going through. That satellite tag then beams the data to us. I usually get a notice on my phone, and with that, we were able to track the migratory patterns of these animals throughout the region. Very interesting is that we also, during that same trip, we did an investigation on the Saba Bank, but we also did an investigation in the water surrounding St. Martin. And very interesting is that we caught a number of very small sharks, so juvenile, just born, especially surrounding St. Martin. While on the Saba Bank, we caught some big mamas, so some really big, fat 3.4, 4.3 meter tigers. So it kind of started to plant a seed in our brain that something might be going on. Also, we started to get the satellite data in on the migratory patterns of the species, and we noticed that most of the animals that we tagged, I think over the years, we've tagged close to 30 animals, and most of the animals that we tagged follow almost exactly the same pattern as you see here. So this was an animal that we tagged on the Saba Bank. It then went into the middle of the Caribbean Sea where it hung out around Aves Islands for a little while. Then it went to off the coast of Trinidad and Tobago. Did a small foray up to Barbados, and then from Barbados, this particular animal, I don't have it in this clip, but then moved towards Puerto Rico, and then Hurricane Irma happened, and we kind of lost track of that shark. But like I mentioned, most of the species, most of the specimens that we do tag, follow more or less the same migratory pattern. So next, we were like, okay, we caught on the Saba Bank, we usually catch the big mamas in the areas surrounding St. Martin, which are seagrass beds for the most part. We were catching juveniles. So we reached out to our partners Beneath the Waves and the University of Arizona. And we said, okay, how about doing ultrasound of the big females on the Saba Bank to establish if they're actually carrying any pups, and to also insert satellite tags. So this is my colleague Ayumi from the Saba Bank Management Unit, and she is here holding an ultrasound device. And this is basically the same type of ultrasound device that you would use on a human mom. We also kidnapped and held hostage the World Wildlife Fund. We took their panda, held it hostage, and demanded that if they were to ever see their beloved panda again, that they fund our shark conservation work. This is just a joke that I put for the laughs, but the last stage of our, or the latest stage of our shark conservation work was actually funded by WWF, which we're very grateful for. And this is the usual expedition shenanigans which happened. The representative from the World Wildlife Fund brought a panda teddy bear on board. So we kidnapped it and sent a hostage video asking for an increase in funding, which we eventually got. So I suppose it worked. Like I mentioned, we partnered very closely with Beneath the Waves in this research. They came down twice, once in April last year, and again in August. In April, we tagged around St. Martin, focusing on especially the juvenile animals. And then in August, we did a wide-scale expedition to the Saba Bank, where we were on an expedition ship for 10 days in the middle of nowhere, just focused on tagging these animals. Of course, everything we do comes with a significant amount of education and outreach, especially with my communications department at DCNA, we really stepped up our education and outreach component as a part of this project. And here you can see our colleague Brooke Anderson from the Sulakowski lab at the University of Arizona, ultrasounding one of the big fat females that we were able to tag on the Saba bank. And this was actually one of the locations closest to Saba, which you can see in the background here. Big shout out to our expedition ship crew. It's the first time in history, I think, that they delivered pizza 50 nautical miles out on the Saba bank, which was just an awesome experience for us. So here's the crew from the Caribbean Explorer, which is usually a liveaboard dive boat that services our islands, but we chartered the ship, and they, while we were tagging out in the middle of nowhere, they actually delivered us pizza. So I just wanted to shout them out because they were excellent to work with. This is our expedition crew using the Marine Park Patrol boats of the Saba bank. This is the expedition that we did in August with the support of WWF. And what was very unique about this expedition is that we invited all of the conservation officers from the 6 islands of the Dutch Caribbean to participate. So we didn't only involve the reps from St. Martin, St. Eustatius, Saba and the Saba bank, but we also brought our colleagues from Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao to join in on the expedition. So that, you know, and there's nowhere better place, there's no better classroom than at sea, hands-on training with these animals in order to place the tags. We had 16 tiger sharks, 32 Caribbean reef sharks, and 4 nurse sharks. 4 nurse sharks is too much. For those of you who are involved in shark conservation, you know why. But it eventually was an exhausting but a very successful project. You know, I'm trying to remember the biggest. I'm not even going to go there, but we caught some females that were over 4 meters. Here's my colleague Melanie, the director of the St. Martin Nature Foundation, placing the satellite tag. It's a close-up of the satellite tag. And this is a picture of our colleague from Beneath the Waves, Sammy, taking video. And this is Brooks' hand from Sulakowski lab at the University of Arizona, ultrasounding the shark after we put the shark into tonic immobility. Tonic immobility is when you know, certain animals have it, sea turtles have it as well. But when we do shark research, it's a method that we use where we flip the animal upside down, cause a little bit of a short circuit in the animal, and the animal completely relaxes and allows us to do our scientific workup of the animal. So here you see Brooks' hand ultrasounding the cavity of this particularly large female tiger shark. And that's another picture. And then, while we were reviewing the video on the expedition ship, we actually did find that that particular female was carrying pups in a very early stage of development. As these things always go, for those of you who have been on expeditions before, it's always on the last day that some of the last animals that we get successful results. And this was definitely the case. We ultrasounded so many large female tiger sharks, and it's only the last 4 that we did on the last day that we had the expedition ship chartered that we were able to establish that the animal indeed was carrying pups. We did ultrasound Caribbean reef sharks, which are also important because of their recent uplisting, downlisting. I can never figure out which one it is, but since their recent listing as an endangered species in our region, we also ultrasounded them, and we also found that the majority of them are also carrying pups, which is also good news. This is the expedition crew. As I mentioned, it involved the conservation officers from all 6 islands of the Dutch Caribbean. And with that data, we continue to push for the establishment of species-specific conservation zones. So the Dutch government, this is my colleague Dalia from Saba, that's on the right. On the left is a junior minister from the Netherlands who is no longer there, so her name I don't remember anymore. But with the work that we've done with the data that we were able to provide, so that data-driven decision-making, our policy briefs were submitted to the powers that be, we were able to get enhanced shark conservation measures for our islands and marine mammals. They threw in for some reason, but we definitely did not complain. Yeah, like I mentioned, data determines decision making. We are now in the process of analyzing all of our data. Going out in the field and collecting the data is fun. It's exciting, but it also involves at the end sitting behind your computer and crunching all the data and running statistics, which I absolutely hate to do. So that's why we hired someone to do it. And the plan is to do this again in the Southern Caribbean on the islands of Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. We've tagged on Bonaire, we've tagged on Aruba. We have yet to tag on Curacao, but the idea is to also charter an expedition ship with the funding from WWF so that we can do the same exercise in our Southern Islands. One of the most exciting developments in the recent 2 years is that together with our partners at Beneath the Waves, we established the Caribbean Shark Coalition. And the Caribbean Shark Coalition is really an organization that we set up to build capacity for the conservation of sharks and rays in the wider Caribbean. And then really from a grassroots bottom-up approach. I mean, there's so many people that are doing excellent work, ranging from Cuba all the way down to Trinidad, but they do need the support that they don't necessarily get from their own governments or from their own institutions on the ground on the island. So we decided that we will all pool our resources together and set up the Caribbean Shark Coalition so that we'll be able to provide the capacity building to the folks on the ground who want to do shark research and shark conservation. Last year, we held our first virtual training during the Omicron wave, but hopefully, and I'm knocking on wood here, barring any subsequent variants, we are planning our first in-person workshop for this year. We were planning on doing it for World Ocean Day, but my time is a little bit short because I have some work to do in the Red Sea. But the idea definitely is to have an in-person workshop either in the Bahamas or in Antigua, where we will invite participants from across the Caribbean to get hands-on training in shark conservation, and to also give a small project fund, seed funding, so that they can start up their own conservation program or their own shark research program. Whether they want to start with deploying Bervouts or engaging fishermen or local communities, we work all of that out in at the later stage. And then the ultimate plan is to really have within the wider Caribbean region large-scale marine protected areas that will protect the species throughout their range. And we're really using the tiger shark as an example of a highly migratory species throughout the wider Caribbean region to show that it is important that we don't act within silos, that we don't focus too much on the politics that divide us, but instead on the ecosystems that unite us. And in this case, the Caribbean Sea. And this was something that together with my colleagues, Austin Gallagher from Beneath the Waves, Diva, who I think is here as well, Ollie Shipley, Neil Hagerschlag, and David Sims in an article that we wrote in Nature. For more information, please check out not only for our shark conservation work, but our other conservation work that we do at the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance. Please check out our website, dcnanature.org. You can also follow us on our socials, and you can get updates on, like I said, our shark conservation work, but also some of the other work that we're doing both on for the conservation of terrestrial and marine ecosystems. One of the exciting things that we have coming up is that we're running a workshop on the restoration of sea urchins. There was a major sea urchin collapse a couple of decades ago, and our partner organization on SEBA has figured out a way to grow urchins in the lab and then to seed the reefs with lab-grown sea urchins to enhance the population. So if you're interested in that or in any of the projects that we do, please visit our website. And that's my talk.
Thank you, Tadzio, so much for that excellent presentation. I know I saw a lot of comments in the chat while you were speaking. Some people were shocked on these stats on the food labeling and worried about if they were eating sharks and didn't know. So they really love the pictures, the videos and stuff like that. Someone said that we have a whale whisperer, a dolphin whisperer, but no shark whisperer. We need to change that and stuff. So guys, I would like to open the floor up now for questions. So if you have any questions for Tadzio, Dr. Anjani, or Christopher, feel free to ask away. I'm still seeing some comments in the chat saying that that was an amazing presentation. Thank you, very informative. So I see Destiny has raised her hand. So Destiny, you could go ahead.
Hi, good morning. So I just have, well, you answered quite a bit of my questions like towards the end, but by any chance, do you guys have like an internship program or anything of the sort? Because I find what you do very interesting, and I'm very interested in like getting hands-on experience. I know you said you guys are planning to do a workshop, but like outside of that, do you guys do any internships or anything like that?
That's for me?
Yeah. I believe so.
Yes,
yes.
Yeah. Sorry.
All right, great. Well, thank you for that question. And interestingly enough, in June last year, I was with Beneath the Waves in the Turks and Caicos Islands doing shark tagging, together with the Department of Environment and one of the dive operators. I mean, I'm so horrible with names that I don't remember what it is anymore. But yeah, definitely. I mean, feel free to contact us. We always have internship opportunities. We also are connected to various regional organizations that, in case we don't have any openings at the moment, we can point you in the right direction of. So by all means, I mean, you know, we often have intern requests coming from Europe and from the US, but with all due respect to our more developed, and I put that in quotation marks, our more developed partners, we always give priority to internship requests coming from the Caribbean. So by all means, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Jasmine, I see you have your hand up as well, so go ahead.
Hello, good day. I just have a question in terms of, I think like, in terms of it, the biggest thing is mentality towards sharks. And I was wondering, like, you have like so many different things, like different projects you're doing, especially with the fisherman project. How did you speak to them about this? I know you said, like you're saying that they can become ambassadors of the project, and then it can also be a tourism aspect, but how did you change perspectives for all of these different projects? Because I know that mentality is there.
Yes, thank you. I mean, it took liters and liters and liters of beer, basically. I mean, fishermen, and although I say that as a joke, it's really, you know, the fishermen, you know, we tried organizing a community session where we organized or we rented a room, we invited them to come to give a presentation, etc., etc., and we found that didn't work. So it involved us going to them personally, sitting down with them, having a chat, earning their trust. It also involved us going out with them on their fishing trips. We wanted to, we considered for a while incentivizing. So if they placed a tag, etc., etc., we would give them a compensation for that. But we found out that that is not something that is sustainable. I mean, project funding unfortunately runs out. What we also did sort of simultaneously is we did a valuation study on the species, where we analyzed how much the species is worth in terms of monetary value on market. So in this case, for a Caribbean reef shark, $150 on the French side, where selling shark meat and shark fishing is still allowed. But we also did an evaluation on the species in terms of tourism value. So divers who want to dive with sharks, and that shot up to about $80,000 per live animal for the year. I mean, divers don't only come to dive; they stay in hotels, they eat seafood at the restaurants, which may or may not be sharks, apparently, and they, go to bars, etc., etc. So, using that combination, building personal relationships, making them, not making them out to be the villain, but really informing them very early stage in our process really made a difference for us. And, it resulted in, when I traveled to the islands where we did a lot of the fisher engagement outreach, I mean, these guys won't let me alone. So I heard you were in St. Martin and you didn't come and see us. So it also developed into a personal relationship with these guys. And that doesn't go to say that, they will not catch an animal as bycatch and try to make money out of it. But at least a targeted fishery is not something that that occurs anymore because of the good work that they have been doing. And they're still providing us with data. So I think involving them, talking to them, not departing from a stance of, you guys are the bad guys, but involving them as an important stakeholder from the very beginning, I think was a very effective way in us approaching.
I see we have a question from Ricardo from Haiti. He was saying that the work is enormous because they are captured and killed in certain regions of the Caribbean, especially Haiti, and he's referring to sharks. And he's like, how can we deal with this problem?
I mean, there are so many organizations, including in Haiti. I mean, the Haiti Ocean Project does excellent work, especially with juvenile oceanic white-tip sharks. But that's why we started the Caribbean Shark Coalition. I mean, we're very much believers in data should drive proper decision-making. Without, proper data at hand to be able to approach decision makers to say, we have a problem in our shark population. We understand that there are issues related to poverty that need to be addressed, that we also need to take into account, because let's be honest, if a family has problems or a head of a family has problems feeding his or her family, and they catch a shark, which would either give them food or give them the revenue to be able to buy food, then you have a wider issue to deal with. But at least collecting the data, packaging it in a way that's easily digestible by the policy makers and working towards a policy is I think the proper approach to be able to address some of these issues. The problem is that some of the places operate in an environment with a complete lack of structured information. So no research and monitoring going on that will be able to build the case for enhanced conservation. So that's one of the main reasons why we put together the Caribbean Shark Coalition, to involve as many grassroots organizations as we can, but also to share information, to share ideas. I mean, I may not have all the answers. Our partners at Beneath the Waves, who do this stuff for a living, focusing on sharks, may not have the answers, but someone else may have the answers. Our partners in Jamaica, Jaden and co from the Jamaica Shark Tagging Project may be better positioned to answer questions related to what's going on in Haiti or the DR or some of the greater Antilles. So that's really why we put together this coalition, so that we can share. I mean, it's not only about training and about sort of the hands-on stuff, but it's also about sharing best practices and information and contacts, and even just by just for people to know that are in this field and that are trying to make a difference, that they are definitely not alone, that there are people out there who if they need help, that are there and ready to help them, maybe not in person, but that can easily give advice and tips and recommendations on how to move forward.
So we have a next question, and Ayan, I see your hand is up, but before we jump to you, we have a question from Jarell and Amelia to Dr. Anjani, and they would like to know if you need any assistance for the restoration projects happening in Tobago, and if you have any internships available.
Okay, thanks, Khadija. So because we're now sort of implementing the basic infrastructure to do restoration, I believe we would, in the scaling up part of it, so that would probably be in the next year to 5 years, hopefully if everything goes according to plan, we'd definitely be looking for people to help, volunteers and internships. We'd like to do paid internships, and so those are the things that we'd want to work towards, getting people having, you know, part-time jobs and assisting during like the coral spawning season and whatnot. So we are trying to build that into our project as we move along, and so if you stay connected with us, we should be giving those opportunities at least in the next year or so. Amelia, I think there's definitely a lot of coral restoration work being done throughout the Caribbean. I would say Tobago is actually quite behind in that regard. So there's definitely work being done in Barbados. So you can definitely look them up. And I think coral restoration is volunteer heavy. And because there's a lot of work. So I'm for sure you'd be able to help out in your different islands and whatnot.
All right, so Tadzio has to leave now. So thank you so much for joining us, Tadzio. I know that you have a lot of work going on and you ran away and you gave us your time, and I'm sure everybody is very much appreciative of you coming and speaking and presenting today. And once again, happy belated birthday. And I feel like you should be celebrating the whole week, because why not?
the weekend, I'll celebrate all weekend.
Okay,
by
right.
Netflixing and chilling. But thank you very much. And yeah, I mean, if there are any, if there are any questions, requests, you can send me a message on Facebook, on Instagram, via email, through the contact form on our website. And please feel free to reach out, and don't hesitate. And I'm sorry I had to leave. I really wish I could stay longer instead of rejoining our policy and advocacy workshop, which we are now doing.
So when will you all be coming to Dominica?
Whenever you invite us, dude. We're more than happy to go to Dominica. I was in Dominica in 2015 for a submersible expedition, and I would love to redo that, involving some of the deep sea sharks that we're interested in.
All right, so before anyone else sneak in any last question, I would say bye and have fun at the workshop. All right, bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye, Ange. Good to see you.
And Sweelan, I believe you had a question for Dr. Anjani.
Okay.
Hi, yeah. So there's so much information about corals and emergent information on protection, conservation, and resilience in general. I was wondering, in your opinion, are there any areas that still require research, or maybe is lax in the region, so that you could like streamline particular projects implementations with respect to that particular issue, like exactly what they could do to kind of optimize on, because there's so many work being done on like coral restoration and stuff, like what else is there to do?
That's a very good question. So when it comes to coral reef research, and I think anybody who goes into an avenue of ecology or the natural environment, unfortunately now all of our research, there's this pure research and then there's applied research. And I think anybody who loves coral reefs or loves forests or loves any kind of natural ecosystem, there's a lot that we just don't know. And so when it comes to pure research, just understanding coral reefs have hundreds, if not thousands of species that live in and among, and they vary from place to place. They're extremely diverse and whatnot. And so scientists are still learning a lot from that pure core research that then has its benefits into applied research. So there's still a lot that we don't know about coral metabolism, about how the symbiotic relationship it has with the algae that lives in its tissues. There's a lot in terms of the behavior and dynamics in different places around the world. In Tobago, a lot of that core research is actually quite absent. And so like when you think about how the corals in Tobago has evolved perhaps differently from other islands in the Caribbean or vice versa, or the reefs that are found in deeper parts of the ocean, how they're connected with shallow coral reefs, there's still a lot of information that we just don't know about. And I think there is a core need for that to happen. And what that would do is that when it comes to issues of climate change and it comes to issues of pollution and how we impact the reefs, that definitely would help in terms of how we utilize that information. So for sure, like when it comes to specific environments, especially in Tobago, again, there's still a lot to be done. And it all depends on your specific interest. The field of coral reef ecology is huge. I don't know everything about it, and I'm also quite learning a lot as well. So you never stop learning and you never stop discovering. That's what I could say.
Question. Do you all like need to be PADI certified if you're doing a lot of diving with the corals and so on?
Yes, I mean, I think that's one of the enjoyments. So you should be certified, and that's for all the health and safety reasons when you're doing research. And you, in fact, when you do research, a lot of the reviewers or publications, they would make sure that whatever dives you're doing for whatever experiment meet the laws and the regulations of that country, because the one thing they don't want to do is having dangerous research and dangerous research being replicated. So that is a very important part of our job, is to be to have all the necessary licenses and skills, especially in like CPR training and whatnot. While most coral reef ecologists do dive, there are coral reef ecologists that don't necessarily do the diving. There's a lot of, for example, metadata analysis, genetics work that's done in the lab. So it's not absolutely necessary to be a diver and to be a coral reef ecologist. I just know that a lot of people generally like diving, and so that's why they do it. But there's a lot of other work that's done outside of, well, above the water, essentially.
Any other questions from anyone? I have a question, but I would let the participants go first. So anybody else have any other questions, feel free to jump in or raise your hand. Amelia has a question for Christopher, and she would like to know, is there research on pollution and mangroves happening in the region?
Thanks so much. I don't know why it suddenly got brighter, but yes. Well, I guess part of it is that we did some reports recently, state of mangroves in the Caribbean, and also state of marine pollution. And there is a lot looking at the impacts of pollution, particularly on mangrove restoration. Interestingly, there was some research most recently done even here in Jamaica by University of the West Indies that was showing a significant impact of plastics in limiting or hindering mangroves being able to recover and being able to grow effectively. I think, unfortunately, mangroves have been looked at in the past as being a sink for pollution and a way of controlling pollution as well. So yes, some research going on. Yes, some activities looking at how pollution is impacting on mangroves, but I think also some research looking at how can we use mangroves, constructed wetlands, artificial wetlands as effective ways of also reducing pollution, particularly from sediment and from domestic wastewater.
I see AJ, you have your hand up, so go ahead.
Yes, please. My question is for Christopher Corbin. So I remember in your presentation, you said that around 15% of sewage water is collected. I'm not sure if it was mentioned, but where does the other percentage of the sewage water go if or is lost?
Yes, it's a little bit of a disturbing scenario. Throughout the region, what you find is that most of the urban centers, the cities, what they tend to have is essentially a primary collection system. So a lot of urban areas, there's a collection system, and you have outfall, and sometimes just the only primary treatment, and then untreated wastewater going out into the environment. For some cities in the region, there's a bit more improved treatment in terms of secondary treatment, and very, very few have tertiary treatment, which is where you remove the nutrients. For the most part, in many of our countries that don't have centralized treatment systems where collection of the wastewater takes place, the treatment is done using septic tanks and pit latrines. So then what you have is pollution either taking place through seepage into groundwater, into surface water. But in some cases, you do have effective decentralized ways of dealing with sewage if you have a properly constructed septic tank, it's properly drained, you have safe disposal of the sludge. But I would say that in many countries, that's also not taking place, and probably also not being monitored. So you also hear of situations where you have these septic systems that are failing, and then you have pollution of groundwater or surface water taking place. For most of it, though, ultimately, it's going to end up in the sea.
Okay, so we have the last two questions here because I see that it's 10:58 and we're supposed to finish at 11. So I'm going to ask you guys to just be patient and give us at least 5 more minutes after the time to answer these two questions and then to address some housekeeping. So the next question was from Ayana, and she's asking Dr. Anjani, here in Guyana, there's no protection of sharks, much less the coral reefs. How would this affect the wildlife population of both that are protected elsewhere in the world when Guyana is destroying these two populations? Additionally, could the UN SEG Council sanction Guyana for these issues?
Unfortunately, in Trinidad and Tobago here, our sharks nor our coral reefs are protected, and that is replicated throughout the Caribbean. So if you think, I mean, you're aware of your issues in Guyana, but if you multiply it by all the other countries that may not have any protective laws or even, marine protected areas, it does exacerbate the issue quite significantly and quite quickly. And so a lot of work should be done on at the Caribbean scale where we do have these networks. So as you imagine, sharks, as Tadzio discussed, are highly migratory especially when you come to the larger tiger sharks and those bigger species. And of course, a lot of these important fish and shark species rely on coral reefs for certain parts of their life cycle. So a lot of juveniles are residents on coral reefs as well as mangroves. And I know Guyana has a lot of extensive mangrove ecosystems that are very important and will provide quite a significant amount of nurseries for the South American coastline. All the protections of these ecosystems within the country and within the region is extremely important. And so I think that's where a lot of the effort, there is a lot of effort, just not a lot of attraction, but that is where the effort has to take place, is where we have these Caribbean agreements and UN treaties and conventions that we hold our governments accountable to, and we try and get communities and individuals and whatnot to be involved in that process, to have accountability and to put that pressure on. I've never heard, maybe Chris could talk more about like the council sanctions, but I'm not familiar with that at all. But if you can have sanctions for environmental degradation, that would be something as well. Oh,
All
the
right.
lionfish one. Okay, should I?
Yeah, you're seeing it. Okay.
Yes. Okay, so Shannon Weeks asks, does IMA actively do lionfish research in terms of the effects that they have on the reefs and herbivores? Also, do you think that these invasive species are or can become a big problem? And do you think that they are underestimated as a threat? Lionfish are a major threat on coral reefs because they target juvenile species. And when you think about the groupers and the snappers, these are the fish communities that reside on coral reefs. They sort of vacuum up all the juvenile species on the reef and can have significant impacts on the fish populations, on top of the fact that we don't have proper fish management tools and whatnot. And so they are a known issue. What is lacking, though, are sort of the country by country variations in monitoring the effects of lionfish. And I know the IMA actually, we have gotten funding through our Green Fund program to do an intensive lionfish study in Tobago, and hopefully that will kick off this year or for the latest beginning of next year, where we do look at ways in which we can sustainably catch lionfish. Lionfish is very hard to catch because usually you have to dive, and obviously the diving community is really small. And so there are efforts being made in which we can work with the fisher folk to learn about their strategies of catching elusive fish like the lionfish and whatnot. So there is considerable work being done, and they, definitely try lionfish, try eating lionfish. It is a fish species that requires the human hand to sort of help cull and maintain the populations to a low number.
All right. Ricardo, I see you snuck in a question there, but I will go ahead and read it out. So in Haiti, there's a real problem of pollution of the seas. And not only that, there's no program of coral reefs and sharks which are killed. At what level would the involvement of young people in the face of these problems be useful? I think that might be for both of you guys.
Yeah, maybe I can start because I can also touch a little bit upon those regional frameworks and so on, which exist. And I fully agree with Anjani. Sometimes our governments only take action when they're forced to. Unfortunately, that's the reality. And having these regional legal agreements, these regional commitments, does put a bit of pressure on them, so that, if there's some agreement at the regional level for the Caribbean, this tends to filter its way down to heads of government and ministers and so on. So that is one side of it. And we as a regional convention, one of the things that we do is try to work with governments to have them meet some obligations. So set up marine protected areas, improve legislation and enforcement on pollution, so that there's some level of accountability. But I still think that alone also needs now the grassroots support, the support of young people and communities and so on. So in the case of Haiti, for example, we have been trying to work with Haiti to have them be part of the family of UNEP's Cartagena Convention. We have done some small projects there, but there's so many challenges: pollution, waste management, wastewater management, coral reef protection. So I think it's really about providing opportunities for young people and local communities to express their concerns. I think it's us as agencies like UNEP and other in mobilizing resources and projects that would now address the root of the problem. I think a lot of projects do tend to go through governments. Again, that's how they work. But I think there's an opportunity for greater civil society involvement in actually doing on the ground community-based projects, environmental projects. So again, I encourage persons to join youth groups, community groups, environmental groups, advocacy groups, build a capacity that allows you then maybe to take advantage of when there are small grant programs and other projects that we could use. So it's not simple, but I think we need to start. It has to happen. Over.
All right. Well, Christopher, I know that you had the people guess the percentages at the beginning, and some people would love the answer, the percentage of land-based pollution that's affecting marine resources. So if you could provide them with the answer, I think it would give them some peace. So
yeah, it was ABC, the third one, 75 to 85% or 70 to 80%. That third figure. And the point I just wanted to reinforce then is that when we talk about pollution, if we were to really make a difference, it's about what we do on land. You know, yes, there's pollution coming from ships and the cruise liners and so on, but that's generally in a 15 to 20% range. It's our activities, whether it be residential, commercial, industry, it's our activities on land that are having the biggest impact on the marine environment.
all right, and on that note, I feel like we should wrap things up. It is 11:07. So Christopher and Anjani, thank you so much for joining today and lending your voice, and be ready and willing to answer and participate when I send my lovely emails for all these different initiatives and stuff. I feel like our participants were very much, you know, they really got stuff from you guys and enjoyed this session. I hope I'm speaking correctly on behalf of everyone. So if you did, send a thumbs up, reaction, or smiley face or something like that, so that I know that, you know, it was good. And I'm sure that we will be able to bring you guys back for future initiatives and stuff, because I feel like there's more questions that people would like to ask. So before you guys hop off and I address some housekeeping, I see Sweelan, our social media person for SOA Caribbean, is saying picture time. So she wants to take a group photo. So those of you who can't put your camera on, I know it's a little off guard, feel free to go ahead and make sure big smiles. And Sweelan, remember to give everybody a countdown.
Yeah. All right, 3, 2, 1. I'm gonna take a next pic. 3, 2, 1. Got it. Thank you guys, as always.
All right, so you guys would have received an email yesterday that will give you access to the drive, where you would be able to, one, get the form to your attendance, to state your attendance, and then two, if you miss a session, you would get the recording as well as the absentee form, and they're all in the drive that was shared with you guys, one location. Unfortunately, I did not realize, because I uploaded the document to my work email, that you guys have to request access, but I am granting it as soon as I see the request. So it's just that little hiccup there, and the recording from day one is giving problems to upload. It is a nightmare. I don't know why, the opening session, but I know most of y'all would have been there, and I am still trying to get that up. But you would definitely have the recording from yesterday is already there, and today is going to be up in like 2 hours if you know anyone that missed and would like that. So once again, thank you, Christopher and Anjani, so much for joining and for being here. And any housekeeping questions before we go real quick? Or is everybody good? So I'm guessing everyone is good. Yes, no, maybe. Okay, I'm seeing thank you for a very informative session. I'm seeing all good. Okay, so I'm gonna assume it's all good. All right, guys, so I would see you all tomorrow. Tomorrow we're gonna be joined by Peace Boat. I know in the opening session, Brandon from SOA would have mentioned Peace Boat. So Peace Boat is gonna be here. They have some amazing programs and opportunities. And I personally love Peace Boat. So there's that. And then there's the SOA representative that will be coming to discuss more about opportunities. So funding, internships, the different programs that they have going on and how you could get involved with that. And then we also have Fabian Cousteau. Very excited to have him join, and he's going to talk about the work that he's doing, as well as the opportunities that you guys can get involved with. And Dr. Guppy from University of Trinidad and Tobago is also going to be joining us. So tomorrow, same time, 9 a.m., I will see you guys. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Make sure and eat lunch. Make sure and eat breakfast tomorrow morning so you can be pumped and ready for tomorrow's session. So bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.